Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing PAX in the 15-minute pool in ICC. Had to wait a really long time for this game, but was finally paired. My opponent opens with d4. What to play today? Let's play d6. I'm going to play something offbeat. If he plays knight f3 in order to stop e5, I'm going to play bishop g4. Okay, so c4 can be met by e5, and now we're in normal territory for this opening. This is the idea for black. You try to organize a quick e5. We get the queens off the board right away. And you guys know that I like endgame, so this is appealing to me. Hard to call this an endgame, really. It's more of a queenless middle game. There is plenty of play. One theme for black in this line is to play c6 and then stick the king on c7. That is most of the time a really good square for the black king. So I'll probably be doing that ASAP. I can play bishop e6 and just attack this pawn first. I think I'll do that. He could play bishop g2 and hit b7, but I'll play c6 all the same. Typically, black will play after c6, king c7, put this pawn on f6, and try to get the bishop out to c5. So let's just go ahead and proceed with this plan. If bishop b2, I'll put the pawn on f6 immediately. I guess I could play knight d7 as well, but I'll probably just put the pawn there. That's a surprising move, but it makes sense. He wants to trade the light square bishops. He maybe realizes that his bishop on g2 would have been blocked anyways, so he just goes ahead and does that. I kind of have to trade because I don't really want to allow him to capture and double up my pawns. So let's trade and then play f6 most likely. Yeah, we'll stop the knight from coming to g5. e6 is tender, but he can't stick a knight there, so it's fine. I'm going to check my opponent's stats real quick. So he has a peak rating of 1887. Now he does the same thing with this bishop. That's kind of funny. 97 wins, 67 losses. Pretty good ratio. So this one I may not take. Although, if I take, he takes with his knight. I kind of just want to do that because it's funny him having both knights on the rim. They're supposed to be grim there, right? But he can reroute that knight through c2 and then maybe to e3. I was actually thinking playing knight d7, try to get him to take. I take with my knight, and then stick it on e6 soon. Kind of shore up some squares. Nah, I'm just going to take all the same. And put this here. My king is still coming to c7, I promise. He's probably going to castle queenside now if I had to venture a guess. It feels like a bit of a cop-out for white to exchange the light square bishop and the dark square bishop this early. Seems like he's trying to deaden the play. But I think in this dual knight position, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for both sides. Plays f3. Okay, maybe he's going to stick his king on f2. All right, let's just proceed with the plan. e4. I think that move is weakening, and I'll tell you why. The d4 square, which I control with my pawn on e5, can no longer be defended by a pawn for him. So this is a future outpost square for me. If I play knight c5, e6, d4, the only way he could chase that knight away is if he offers a trade for it, like bringing one of his knights back. Whereas if he had kept the pawn on e2, he could always play e3 and prevent me from occupying that d4 square. So I could play knight d7, I could play knight c5 directly, I could play a5. a5 is not a bad move at all, just to stop him from playing b4. Good options all around. So if I start with knight c5, he can't play b4 then because I check and pick up the b4 pawn. He'll probably play king e2. All right, I'm going to start with this move. If this were a longer time control game, I would probably be thinking about my previous move, like whether to play knight e7 or a5. There might be some subtle difference between them, but it's hard to discern in this quick of a time control, so I just got to choose one and go with it. And I know that the knight is going to come to c5, so I just did it. All right, so now is b4 actually a threat? So say I play knight e7 and he goes b4. I drop the knight back to e6. Do I really care that he has played that b4 move? Maybe. I mean, it's kind of nice to take that option away. So I'm going to play a5. I think I can wait another move to develop this knight. I don't think it's a big deal. After knight e7, this knight is not going to go anywhere anyways. It's not like g6 is a great square, and I can't go to f5 or d5. So I think it's more important just to restrict his play, prevent b4. Okay, now I'm looking at knight e7. Just double checking and making sure I can't send this knight somewhere better. Like developing it through h6 would be weird. I don't really see where it's going to go. So I'm not going to copy his development scheme. I think that would be a little bit too much. So we'll just play knight e7. Now the d file is open, but I don't think you'll see like either side really jumping for joy, trying to occupy it at a moment's notice. I mean, he might play a rook to d1. I might play a rook to d8, but there's not really infiltration squares for either of us down the file. So it's not such a huge deal like who gets the first mover advantage, if you will, in trying to occupy that file. Okay, so knight back to f2, that's sensible. I want to get this knight staring at the d4 square as well. I kind of think he's going to play knight d3 next, though, and try to exchange this guy. In that case, I want to be ready to play knight back to e6. I need this knight to do something in the position. If I play a rook to d8, he's just going to play a rook to d1 and look for trades. a4 will always be met by b4. I could stake out some space on the king side if I want. Something like h5. He can play h4. Everywhere he's able to meet me, kind of move for move. I still like my position. I think I'm like a tiny bit better here. But this advantage could dissipate if I don't do something with it. Need some constructive way to continue. All right, I'm going to play knight e6. And a plan I'm considering is playing c5 and then putting the knight on c6, the other knight on c6. And trying to obtain an absolute clamp on the d4 square. If I can direct both knights into that square, it's a guarantee that one of them will be a fairly permanent outpost. The only thing is, so say I play c5 right now. He can go knight e3. I can give a check and then pick up the pawn. Okay, that's a nice point, actually. In playing c5, I permanently weaken b5. So that has me a bit worried, but the only way he could exploit that is if he gets a knight to like c3, let's say, and tries to come in here. He's a long ways from doing that. So I think c5 and then playing knight c6 and trying to come into d4 is not a bad plan at all. Yeah, let's give it a shot. Otherwise, I just don't see how this knight is going to be a part of my position in a meaningful way. Normally, I'd love to keep control over the d5 square so he can't plant his knight there, but I'm just taking a calculated risk that he won't be able to bring his knight into d5 before I can sink one of my knights into d4. And I think in sinking one of my knights into d4, I might put a damper on his play. I wonder if one plan he could pursue here, though, would be knight d3, looking to play f4 and try to break up my e5 pawn. He might need to put his king on e3 in order to do that, though. Like, say, knight d3, knight c6, f4. I could give a check. We trade the knights. His king comes to e3, but then I have weaknesses on e5, c5. It might be necessary after knight d3 to play kind of a supportive move like b6, and just make sure that c5 is always well defended. Knight d3 makes sense because it also allows his king to come over to f2. So if ever I check him on d4 and say this knight is not defending that square, he can slide over and he won't lose the pawn. He's starting to think a little bit. We're still down on time, but we're already inching closer to an end game. So I think having spent, less than 6 minutes is completely fine. This line's not that bad, by the way. D4, D6, this move order. Okay, A4 I don't really understand. I think that's another weakening move by him. That's similar to the move he played on move number 12, E4. It's like he's just creating weaknesses for no reason. Like now B3 is a pawn he'll always have to watch with a piece because it can't be defended by this pawn anymore. And it's not like I was disputing the B5 square, which he's clamping down on with A4. I was just giving him that square as it was. So now one idea I also have is rook A6 to B6. Probably I should start with knight C6 though. So knight C6, yeah, I'm just trying to come into D4. Don't see a downside to that. If knight E3, once again I check and I'll have my pick of which pawn to take off the board. He can come into D5 with check, but I think king B8 should be fine. If I can win a pawn out of that, I'm happy. Yeah, not really sure what he was thinking with that move. Seems like his positional understanding may be a little lacking because he's played some reasonable moves, but he's making micro concessions that can soon add up to something major. Yeah, it's tough for him already. I mean, my threat is simply knight d4 check, and I'd be hitting his king plus the f and the b pawns. He could maybe think about playing rook d5, but that doesn't solve the problem. I give a check, we trade. Maybe it slows me down because he would be attacking c5 in that case. But his rook is not really the piece that he wants on d5 when all is said and done. He'd much rather it be a knight. Okay, rook b1, that's probably a good reply. So if I jump in, give it check, we're going to trade knights. He's going to put his king on e3, he's saying. Knight b4 is a move I could play. He takes, I take with my a pawn. That's kind of similar, though, to if I play knight d4. I still sort of like the idea of this rook a6 to b6 move to apply pressure on b3, but if I play rook a6, he might play knight a3 and try to come into b5. Could play rook d8. Rook d8, rook d5, though. And then I don't really want to take his rook because he'll be able to recapture and establish a protected pass pawn. So let's say knight d4, either knight to d4. We trade, king e3, maybe play rook over at that point. He's going to go knight d3. I can support it with b6. He can play that annoying f4 move. I'm still somewhat better, though. Yeah, I still like that position. All right,
check.
Let's give it a shot. Because we're reducing the material a bit. Wow, and he just sacks the exchange instantly, too. This didn't even really cross my mind. But I guess his contention is that he's going to put the knight on d3 and set up like a impervious fortress almost. Wow. Okay, so which way to recapture now? I'm thinking e-pawn. So e takes, knight into d3, let's say b6. You can try to improve his knight, like go knight f4 and come into d5. Maybe c-pawn, though, because c-pawn, maybe gradually I can bring my king in on the dark squares. I just worry if he's able to set up some permanent fortress construction. This is not an easy decision which way to recapture. All right, let's stick with the c-pawn. I'm at 5.5 minutes. Got to make a decision pretty soon, so we'll do that. I guess he figured that knight would be pesky enough that he's willing to just give a pure exchange, and the position is very closed. There's no truly open files yet. There's only half open files on the D and C files. So I could see why he might think he can get away with this. The only thing about that move is I think he's basically just going to batten down the hatches, and he's kind of limiting himself. I don't think he can play for much more than attempt at a draw, so equality. I'm just going to play king d6. I'm going to try to use my king actively, like I said. If later in the endgame I can sneak the king in, I'd love that. I don't think he's going to be moving this knight from d3, though, in the near future. He might like kind of fiddle with his pawns a little bit. He might play like f4 is one move he could consider. I have a majority from the h file through the d file. I'm going to have like an extra d pawn basically. I'd like to open it by playing g6 and then f5. That's kind of my only legitimate plan that I see right now. So he might anticipate that I'll break with a pawn, g6, f5 at some point. I got to watch him maybe counterattacking on the queen side too, like c5 check and b4. But I really think those simplifications, or not simplifications, but that opening of the position should favor me. Knight back to e1. What are you doing with that move? Another move I can't figure out the purpose of. All right, so just g6. Let's just do that. It's too early for him to just sit there and do nothing. I don't know about this. What is the knight doing on c2? Does he want to come all the way to b5? I'm still going to play to open the position. My rooks are not behind any of these pawns, but I think I should seize my chance and play f5 if he's allowing it. Yeah, I think he's going to play knight a3 to b5. I think he's coming all the way in. So if I take, is he taking with the king? He's going to blockade with the king, maybe. All right, let's come here with the rook first. I might double rooks on the f-file and then capture. Yep, the knight is coming over. So king c5, knight b5, maybe rook c7 then. Let's come here. Active king, like I said. I'm going to see if I can take my shot with king b4 somewhere down the road. All right, now rook c7 I think is a good, or rook f7 rather, is a good move. Just controlling this square so his knight can't ever make an appearance on c7. Yeah, my plan in the short term is to double the rooks and take on e4 with check. I haven't taken yet because I think his plan is king takes e4 if I do. And he'd be defending f3 and attacking e5. Even that might be acceptable for black, but if I double first and then take, if he takes with the king, I can grab f3. If he brings the rook over to f1, king b4 might be a possibility. Go after that pawn. He's doubling back. So the knight's coming back to c2. All right. Let's continue as intended. He could try rook f1, so that if I take, he could take with the king then. And f3 is protected, but I might just play king b4 then. or rook f1, king b4 straight away. I just wasn't quite sure about knight c2 check, whether I could be bold and take on b3. So rook f1, king b4, knight c2 check, king takes b3, rook b1 check, king, I guess king takes a4. And I'm not getting mated there. Looks a little scary, but I don't see a mate. Quite honestly, I think he kind of has to try rook f1. Yeah, like he's playing this move, but what's he going to do if I just take e4 now? So if he takes with a king, rook takes on f3, that's got to be close to winning. I see he can take e5 with his king, but actually he gets checkmated if he does that. Rook e8. Yeah, this is not going to work for him. If he takes with a pawn, that's just carte blanche for my rooks to come in. Not good for white. He made way too many knight moves. He should have just kept that knight on d3 after he sacked the exchange. If he would have done that, this would have been a much different endgame. Let's take. Because it's possible I underestimated rook takes d4. And by underestimate, I mean didn't consider at all. Okay, so here I can checkmate him.
Checkmate.
But if back here, where did he start moving the knight around? Yeah, right, starting on move 21. So I played king d6. If he just keeps the knight on d3, the knight is like actualized on this square. I don't think he can get any better than this. It's blockading my passed pawn. It has influence on both wings. It can maybe assist with an f4 advance. I still think black is playing for the win here, but I bet if we turn on the engine, it's going to give black maybe no more than like, let's say a 0.75 advantage. Let's see if I'm right about that. Okay, I'm completely wrong about that. I don't know. The engine might be overestimating this, but I just looking at this with a human eye, this does not seem like minus 2.5. I mean, I'll fully admit that black can probably win this position with best play, but I know from experience, like trying to shake a well-entrenched knight like that can be troublesome. Okay, let's go back and have a look. So d4, and I played this offbeat move d6. Of course, if you're going to play this move for black, you have to be ready to enter a Pierce, potentially. So if they play e4, you're in a Pierce, knight f6, etc. So that's the issue with moves like d6 or e6. If you play e6 on move 1 against d4, you have to, in theory, be a French player if you're going to make this work. But a lot of d4 players won't transpose to those openings, so sometimes you can even get away with it and kind of fake that you're one of those players. So he plays c4. Problem with c4, though, is it doesn't address e5, which is a pawn advance that I think if black can get in, this opening is already pretty respectable looking for black. So a lot of players play knight f3 in a bid to stop e5. The implications of knight f3, however, are twofold. One, black might play, let's say, knight f6 and try to duck into a King's Indian, let's say after c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, where white has already committed the knight to f3 and therefore cannot play lines like, the same-ish variation. Not a big deal if you play systems with knight f3 against a King's Indian, but if you don't, you kind of got move ordered. The other thing is, after knight f3, black can continue with this offbeat move, bishop g4, which is a decent system. Like every once in a while, you'll see GMs venture this line. I know here in the U.S., Varujan Akobian is one guy who plays this. I played him from the white side in this variation. And black tries to take on f3 at a convenient moment when they can double white's pawns. And then they usually go about setting up their pawns on light squares. So if I can give like a sample continuation, let's say something like c4. I'm probably going to botch the move order, but let's say take here, take. A lot of times black will play e6 and then d5, but I know I'm getting the move order wrong. It's so weird seeing this position from the black side. Yeah, I can't quite recall. I know g3 is an option white has, but same thing, like black will take and try to play against the double pawns. And might even play d5 and if white ever advances c4, black might take and give white an isolated pawn in the center. But bishop g4 is a valid option. I would have been winging it after that, but it's interesting. But instead, he plays c4, I play e5, and we get this trade. White doesn't have to trade. They could play knight f3. But in the event of knight f3, I think e4 is a decent option for black. I could play knight d7 if I wanted. Probably would have played e4, though. Kick the knight away. So he takes, I take, and we get a queenless middle game. And like I said, I was going to put my king on c7, almost regardless of what he did. Not sure about the exact move order. Like maybe bishop e6 immediately is not the best. Certainly if I knew he was going to play bishop h3, I would not play bishop e6, because then I could take on h3 in one go, and I wouldn't have had to kind of waste a tempo by playing bishop e6. Computer likes knight c6, but I don't know, maybe c6 is the best and most flexible move. But I played bishop e6, he played b3. Again, the engine is stumping for knight c6, but I played c6. Bishop h3, we got a trade. I think f6 is fine, just keep his knight out of g5 and also defend this pawn. Then he did this. I took. Knight d7. Yeah, and so here he starts making some like small errors that quickly snowballed, and like his play was just very strange. Like the moves that we'll look at when we see the engine evaluation going forward, I'll be looking to see what it thinks about e4, a4, and then that exchange sacrifice on d4. I would say those three moves are the big culprits. I would not play any of those moves if I were white. So, yeah, e4. Engine doesn't hate it, but the eval does go further in black's favor after that move. So the computer just thinks white should castle queenside. Knight c5, knight c2. I might play a5 again. All in all, I think I'd rather be black, like very marginally in these positions, but it's playable for white. White's not hugely worse, as long as he plays solid. But e4, I don't like it because d4 is permanently weakened. My eyes just light up now as far as utilizing that square. If he had kept the pawn back or put it on e3 even, then I think my play is a lot less clear. I might not be able to access that in the long run. I might have to work a lot harder to make something of this position. But he plays e4. I just went knight c5 immediately. There's a lot of flexibility. Like I saw the engine was recommending h5 also. Maybe prepare h4. Start expanding on the wings. But knight c5, he played king e2. I played a5, just ruling out b4. Note that on the previous move, if white had played b4, I have knight d3 check and go pick up this pawn after he moves his king. So a5. This structure, by the way, c6, b7, a5, almost always better than c4, b3, a2. White has a hard time improving that structure, whereas the piece that's on c5, whether it's a knight or sometimes it's a dark square bishop, tends to be pretty dominant. Also, there's usually a weakness of the d4 square in play, as there is in this case. I'm not really going to advance b5 ever. I'm usually going to stick with this pawn on a5, but the pawns on a5 and c6 complement each other very well. They guard key squares like b4, and also the c pawn is guarding d5 and b5, stopping a knight from coming there. So he played knight c2, I just developed. Knight f2. I brought this knight back to e6. And okay, so here I ventured this move c5, which looked a little weird. And, it seems like, I've been talking a lot about my opponent making weaknesses, and I'll freely admit that this creates some weaknesses in my own camp on d5 and b5. But it was just a judgment call that I would be able to improve my position by playing knight c6 and having this knight participate in the assault on the d4 and b4 squares, and that I would be able to do that faster than he could utilize d5, b5. So maybe the computer will like it. Kind of looks like it. It's a top suggestion right now. It was saying h5 for a second, but it's been saying h5 for the past like 5 moves. Yeah, I think it's a valid idea, c5. And again, if he goes knight e3 trying to come here, I have check, and then I pick up this pawn. The square that he wants to go to with his king in order to stop me from doing that has been taken away. So he played a4. Yeah, don't like that move at all. That one's pretty clear. I think that's a question mark move for sure. it just doesn't add anything to white's position. It only detracts from his position. He didn't need any extra control over b5. By playing c5, I'm basically just handing him that square. I'm saying, here, have it. You can utilize it if you want. There's no reason why he would need like rook scope on the a file, because that file is going to be permanently closed. So all this move amounts to is a weakness of b4. He can never defend the b4 square with a pawn, much like when he played e4, he can never defend the d4 square with a pawn. And also he weakens the b3 pawn. So you just created two weaknesses and gained just marginally better control over a square that doesn't even matter right now, b5. So really be suspicious about situations where you have two pawns like that separated by a single file, because the square in between is just ripe for an outpost for your opponent. So now I've got two juicy outposts here and here, and I can get to them pretty fast. So I play knight c6. As you see, black is clearly better according to the engine now. He played rook b1.
Check.
I did jump in. I was thinking about whether I could avoid jumping in for a while, but I think the danger in avoiding it is like maybe I'll miss my chance to trade a pair of knights, and I'll be left with like only one knight that can get to d4. I suppose maybe I could do some plan where like I play one knight into d4 and the other one into b4, but it doesn't seem too practical.
Check.
So I just went ahead and gave a check.
Check.
We traded, and yeah, he played this right away. It took him 1 second, so he was clearly planning that. The computer hates it. You can see the computer thinks it's like a two-pawn blunder. It goes from minus 0.75 to like minus 2.75 or so. On king e3, I thought, I'd still be better, but maybe he can hope to hold this position with accurate play. I mean, all this position boils down to is the difference in the knights. It's just huge. Otherwise, our structures are almost symmetrical, but my knight is already on its best possible square, and his knight is a long ways from, like, say, d5. And he's going to have logistical problems getting it there, because e3 is currently occupied by the king, and getting the knight to c3 seems a little tough. I thought maybe he would do a plan like knight d3, and then maybe bother my c5 pawn, like make me play a move like b6, and then try to go for f4. So let's say we play like rook here, maybe knight d3, let's say b6, and then do this. Trying to slowly destabilize my knight, like knock out one support point of this knight. Probably can't ever get rid of the c-pawn, but he can weaken the e-pawn. So some course of action like this is probably the best way of proceeding, and it's still pretty nice for black, but maybe this would be better. But all that being said, I do think the computer is overestimating black's advantage right here. It might just be looking at the material and not realize how tough this could be actually to win. It would have been interesting to see like how I would try to win this position had he just sat there with his knight on d3. So here I played king d6, and he just started playing pretty poorly, to be honest. Like he kind of just gave me this game after this knight started maneuvering. He doesn't want his king blockading. I think the knight was a much better blockader. He can bring the knight to b5 as he is, but where's it going to go after that? And meanwhile, I'm already prepared for this pawn break idea. And as I mentioned, I don't really want to take on e4 when he's able to take with a king. And this might be possible too, but I saw no reason to hurry with that exchange when I have this clear plan of just doubling up and then eventually taking, trying to force him to take with the pawn. Yeah, now we're in minus 4.5 territory. This is looking pretty much lost. But I don't know. Maybe he could just play a waiting move. I don't know if he wants to move the h or the g pawns. Maybe h4. Even that I'm not so sure. Let's say h4, actually. I'm just going to play... I'm going to play the moves that the computer recommends, and I'm just going to see what sort of plan it comes up with for black. So b6. Okay, h5. Rook hc8. Rook f1. I'm not giving the computer much time to process, but that's okay. Rook cb8. Why would I do that? Yeah, the computer might start suggesting some ridiculous stuff. This kind of shows you the weakness that engines have in the endgame. Like, I just played rook hc8 according to the computer, and now it wants me to play rook cb8. Why? My rook, I'm never going to push b5. I don't understand that move. Rook b1. Computer says play rook d8. Okay, rook g1. Rook ac8, so we're doing a dance with the rooks. g4. Looks like white's the only one who's making progress. Yeah, I mean, you get the point at this stage. the computer's just suggesting that black move the rooks around. It doesn't see a clear way forward yet. I'm looking at the string of moves that it suggests down below. It's all the same. Rook b1. Okay, finally it's saying play a pawn break, g6. Rook h1, king e6, king d2, rook gf8. Problem in here is if I take, he takes with a rook, and I might have just made some weaknesses. Rook h2, rook h8, rook h1, king d6, rook h2, rook ce8. Yeah. So safe to say that the computer doesn't understand this endgame. If white would have kept the knight on d3, logistically speaking, it's hard to win. I would probably still try to prepare a g6 f5 pawn break, but who knows? Maybe white could have held. But yeah, he went off on this kind of suicide mission with his knight. Wasted a lot of time and didn't improve his position. Just made his position worse, actually.
Check.
F takes e4, and if he takes with the pawn, that avoids losing the f pawn, but invites a worse fate, even. Check.
Check.
Yeah, they can check on the second rank next move.
Check.
Yeah, it's going to be over soon. King c1, d3, yeah. So he took here, and we had a nice little conclusion. Rook takes f3 and grabbed the e5 pawn,
Checkmate.
but checkmate. So it's kind of striking. You know, this player, 1872, good rating, but honestly, the reason why he lost this game is just because of unprovoked weaknesses that he made. This is kind of subtle stuff. Like, you know, there's definitely a significant portion of you guys who are watching where, you know, it might not be, even after me explaining it, it might not be like super clear why moves like e4 and a4 are weak. But to an experienced player, like these moves are just very ugly, and they hand me opportunities that were completely unnecessary. You just weaken squares for free, e4 and a4. So avoid those weakening pawn moves whenever possible. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.